Welcome students in this e-learning class. Today I am going to teach you The Pit and the Pendulum short story by Edgar Allan Poe, and I have divided this lecture into two parts. On the first part I shall be briefly going through the storyline. I shall be discussing few critical points, and I shall also give you the background or the context in which the story is set. In the second part of my lecture, I shall be discussing this story, particularly, The Peach and the Pendulum, with references to Poe's other stories. Now, this story opens with an unnamed narrator by revealing that he has been sentenced to death during the historical period which we know as the Spanish Inquisition. This Spanish Inquisition was an institution of the Catholic government, probably between the 15th and the 16th century in Spain, and during this period, it was a period of autarky, and they persecuted all Protestants and heretical Catholics, right? This particular historical incident, which was commonly known as the Spanish Inquisition, it was established in 1478, mark the year 1478, by the Catholic monarchs Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile. It was intended to maintain the Catholic orthodoxy in their kingdoms and to replace the medieval Inquisition, which was under papal control. Right? Papal means of relating to the Pope. It became the most substantive of the three different manifestations of the wider Catholic Inquisition, along with the Roman Inquisition and Portuguese Inquisition. Right? So this is Spanish Inquisition may be defined in a broad category, may be defined elaborately, operating in Spain and in all Spanish colonies and in all Spanish territories, which included the Canary Island, the Kingdom of Naples, and all Spanish possessions in North, Central, and South America. According to some modern estimates, that around 1,50,000 people, mind it, 1.5 lakh people were just persecuted, butchered for various offenses during the 3-century duration of the Spanish Inquisition, out of which between 3,000 and 5,000 were executed. Right? So large-scale slaughtering took place, and here in this story, Pope is referring to that instance of an execution of a prisoner, right? Some fact that this particular tribunal under the election of the Spanish monarchy for upholding religious orthodoxy in their realm was set up or established on 1st November 1478, and later it was disbanded on 15th of July 1834. The seats consisted of a Grand Inquisitor who headed the Council of the Supreme and General Inquisition. It was made up of 6 members. Under it were up to 21 tribunals in the empire. Right? So, this Inquisition was originally intended primarily to identify heretics or the non-believers among those who converted from Judaism and Islam to Catholicism. The regulation of the faith and newly converted Catholics was intensified after the royal decrees issued in the year 1492 and 1502 ordering Jews and Muslims to convert to Catholicism or leave caste. The Inquisition was not definitively abolished until the year 1834 during the reign of Isabella II, and after a period of declining influence in the preceding century. So you see, this Spanish Inquisition is often cited in popular literature and history as an example of religious intolerance, fundamentalism, and repression. Right? Some historians have concluded that many of the charges levied against the Inquisition hyperbole, are sort of exaggerated, right? And they are a legend, they are a result of the black legend produced by political and religious enemies of Spain and specifically of England. Now, in this story, Poe here, who is the unnamed narrator, he is confused because he knows that usual fate of Inquisition victims is a public auto da fe, or in English we translate it as act of faith. This mobility then leads him to surmise that he is not in a tomb, but perhaps in one of the dungeons at Toledo, an infamous Inquisition prison, right? So upon waking, the narrator finds offering the water and bread, which he eagerly consumes. He then resumes his exploration of the prison, determining it to be roughly 100 paces around. Hitting the floor, he realizes that although most of his body has fallen on solid grounds, his face dangles over an abyss. So then he was reflecting on the proximity to the pit, and later explains its functions as a punishment of surprise infamously popular with the Inquisitor. He remarks that he has overestimated its size, most likely having duplicated his steps during the exploration. Now, after some time, the narrator discovers that he is now bound to a wooden board by a long strap wrapped around his body. His captors offer him some flavorful meat, delicious meat in a dish, but no more water. And when he looks up, he notices that the figure of time has been painted on the ceiling. Time, however, has been made into a machine, specifically a pendulum. This is the pendulum of the title The Pit and the Pendulum, which appears to be swinging back and forth, as we have probably seen what a pendulum does, right? How a pendulum operates. The narrator looks away from the ceiling, though when he notices that rats are coming out of the pit and swarming around his foot. When he returns his focus on the ceiling, though, he discovers that the pendulum is constructed like a scythe and it is made like a razor's sharp crescent in its descent towards him. Its progress, however, is maddeningly slow and in a trajectory directly over his heart. Right? Even though he realizes how dire the situation is, the narrator remains hopeful. You see, when the pendulum gets very close towards him, the rats climb on the top of the narrator and chew through the strap, and as the pendulum nears his heart, then the narrator breaks through the strap and escapes from the pendulum swing. The walls of the prison then is heated up and began moving in toward the pit. The narrator realizes that enclosing walls will force him into the pit, and escape that will also mean his death. So he is bound to die. Either or the way, he will eventually die. When there remains not even an inch foothold for the narrator, the walls suddenly retract and cool down. Being afraid, the narrator has begun to fall faint in the pit. Right? But to his great surprise, a mysterious person latches onto him and prevents its fall. Right? The French general Lazelle and his army have successfully taken over the prison in their effort to terminate the Inquisition, and in this way the narrator is saved from death. Right? So this story, The Pit and the Pendulum, is distinct among Poe's first-person narrations. Right? Unlike the hypersensitive characters from other stories, such as Roderick in The Fall of the House of Usher, or the narrator in another famous story, The Telltale Heart, the narrator claims to lose the capacity of sensation during the swoon that opens the story. He then focuses on his own unreliability in ways that other narrators resist or deny. See, upon describing his possible loss of sensation, though the narrator of the story he proceeds to convey the sensory details that he previously claims are beyond him. The narrative pattern resembles or it is similar to that of other stories like the Telltale Heart, and to the extent that the narrator says and does the opposite of what he had originally announced. This story also stands out as one of the most Poe's historically specific tale. Here, the author, Edgar Allan Poe, counteracts the placelessness of the story like the fall of the House of Usher with the historical context of the Inquisition and its religious politics. This historical frame fills in for a personal history of the narrative. And we do not know the specific circumstances of his arrest, nor we are given any account of why the narrator has been arrested, his argument, his court proceedings, or the explanation for the barbarous, for the inhuman cruelty of the inquisitor. So these elaborate descriptions are not present. The tale suggests a political agenda only implicitly. Right? So Poe does not critique the ideological basis of the tale's historical context, or rather, the narrative pattern examines or surveys the physical and emotional fluctuations of the pure present, leaving historical and moral judgment to the readers. Right? So, before concluding, I can say that The Spit and the Pendulum is a traditional story of Poe which goes beyond our conventional understanding of any particular historical incident, a very prominent incident like the Spanish Inquisition, but it is very violent in its approach and ultimately hopeful, graphic, but politically elusive. Thank you.